I'm Mason, 32, and I still can't believe my sister Jessica stole my wedding venue and date with my parents' full support. When I confronted her, she looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You can cry later, this day belongs to me." What she didn't know was that my fiancée Kristen had a secret connection to Jessica's new man Brian, one that would ultimately destroy my sister's perfect day. Sometimes justice arrives when you least expect it, but in the most satisfying way possible. Before I get into this wild story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And hit that like and subscribe button if family drama gets your blood pumping. I never thought I'd find someone like Kristen. Before her, my dating history was a series of disappointments and heartbreaks. I'm a software developer, and while I've always been successful in my career, creating algorithms and solving complex problems, figuring out relationships was a different kind of puzzle altogether. My last serious girlfriend had left me for her personal trainer, and before that, another had ghosted me after 6 months together. I started to think maybe I was just meant to be alone with my code. But then came that charity gala 3 years ago. My company was sponsoring a tech education initiative for underprivileged kids, and I was required to attend. Standing awkwardly by the open bar, nursing a scotch I didn't particularly want, I spotted her across the room. Kristen Hamilton was discussing something animatedly with an older gentleman, her hands moving expressively as she spoke. She wore a simple blue dress that somehow made her stand out in a room full of designer gowns. When she laughed, her whole face lit up, and something inside me just clicked. I don't know what gave me the courage that night, but I walked over and introduced myself. Turns out, she worked in finance but had a background in computer science. We spent the entire evening talking, completely forgetting about the charity auction happening around us. By the end of the night, I had her number and a date planned for the following weekend. Our first date was at this little Italian restaurant downtown. I remember being so nervous I accidentally knocked over my water glass within the first 5 minutes. Instead of being embarrassed, Kristen just laughed and helped me mop up the mess. "Now that we've gotten that out of the way," she said, "we can relax." And we did. 4 hours flew by as we talked about everything from quantum computing to our favorite 80s movies. I knew that night that she was special. The next 2 years were the happiest of my life. Kristen was intelligent, compassionate, and had this quiet confidence I'd never encountered before. She'd built an impressive career in financial analysis, working for a prestigious firm that specialized in risk assessment. She had a knack for spotting inconsistencies and patterns that others missed. I loved the way her mind worked, methodical yet creative. Meanwhile, my family dynamics had always been complicated. My parents, Robert and Linda Jenkins, never tried to hide the fact that my younger sister Jessica was their favorite. Growing up, she got the bigger bedroom, newer clothes, and more attention at every turn. If we both accomplished something, hers was celebrated more enthusiastically. When I graduated with honors in computer science, they came to the ceremony but spent most of the dinner afterward talking about Jessica's summer internship. Jessica was 3 years younger than me and had always been competitive to an unhealthy degree. If I joined the science club, she had to join and become president. When I started running track, she suddenly became interested in cross-country and made sure our parents attended all her meets. This pattern continued into adulthood. When I bought my first condo, she immediately started house hunting, despite not having the finances to support a mortgage. She ended up pressuring our parents to help with her down payment. So when I introduced Kristen to my family, I wasn't surprised by Jessica's reaction. The tight smile, the subtle once-over, the probing questions about Kristen's background, I'd seen it all before. What I hadn't expected was how gracefully Kristen handled it. She answered Jessica's borderline rude questions with poise, deflected the subtle digs with humor, and somehow managed to compliment Jessica genuinely enough that even my sister couldn't find fault. "Your sister is intense," Kristen said afterward, as we drove home. "That's putting it mildly." I replied. Sorry about that. Don't apologize for her, Kristen said, her voice taking on a strange edge I hadn't heard before. People like that are, well, they're responsible for their own actions. After 2 years together, I knew Kristen was the one. I planned a weekend getaway to a mountain cabin, complete with hiking trails and stunning views. On our second morning, I suggested a sunrise hike to a lookout point. As the first rays of light broke over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I got down on one knee and pulled out the ring I'd spent months saving for. Kristen, I said, my voice shaking slightly, you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? The look on her face, surprise, joy, and something else I couldn't quite name, is something I'll never forget. She said yes before I even finished asking, pulling me up for a kiss as I slipped the ring onto her finger. We spent the rest of the weekend in a happy bubble, making plans and dreaming about our future. Back home, we set a date for June 15th, about 10 months away. We wanted a summer wedding but didn't want to rush the planning. After visiting several venues, we fell in love with Willow Creek Estate, a restored historical property with gorgeous gardens, a charming stone building for the reception, and a tree-lined area perfect for the ceremony. It wasn't cheap, but we'd both been saving, and this was our one big day. We put down the deposit and officially booked our date. The planning began in earnest. Kristen created spreadsheets for everything: budget, guest list, vendor options. I'd never seen this side of her, this almost obsessive attention to detail. But it made sense. This was how she approached her work, too. We selected a rustic, elegant theme, with wildflowers and natural elements. Each decision we made felt right, felt like us. I remember thinking, as we tasted cakes and debated invitation fonts, that I'd never been happier. I should have known it wouldn't last. In my family, happiness always came with a price tag, especially if Jessica had anything to say about it. The first red flag appeared about 6 months before our wedding date. Jessica called my parents one Sunday evening while Kristen and I were there for dinner, practically screaming with excitement. Brian Reynolds, the guy she'd been dating for just 4 months, had proposed. My mother immediately burst into tears of joy, and my father started talking about getting champagne to celebrate. When's the big day? My mother asked when Jessica finally paused for breath. We haven't set a date yet, Jessica replied. But I'm thinking summer would be perfect. I felt Kristen tense beside me. Summer was a wide window, but something in Jessica's tone made me uneasy. That's wonderful, honey, my mother gushed. Masson and Kristen are getting married in June. So maybe you could do July or August? There was a pause. Maybe, Jessica said, her voice suddenly cool. We'll see what venues are available. After that call, Jessica developed an unusual interest in our wedding plans. She'd text me randomly asking about our caterer or what flowers we'd chosen. At first, I thought she was just looking for ideas. But the questions became increasingly specific. What was the name of our venue coordinator? What time was our ceremony scheduled to start? Had we paid our vendors in full or just deposits? Then came the family dinner with both couples. Jessica insisted we all meet at an upscale restaurant downtown to celebrate both engagements. Brian seemed nice enough, tall, conventionally handsome, with a charming smile and a sales executive position at a pharmaceutical company. He was attentive to Jessica, pulling out her chair and making sure her wine glass stayed full. But throughout dinner, Jessica found ways to subtly undermine Kristen. When Kristen mentioned our honeymoon plans for Hawaii, Jessica immediately launched into a story about her amazing vacation there last year and how she and Brian were thinking of Bora Bora instead. It's more exclusive. When the topic turned to our venue, Jessica's eyes narrowed slightly. Willow Creek Estate? Isn't that place a bit overdone? Everyone gets married there. We love it, I said firmly. It has exactly the atmosphere we're looking for. If you say so, Jessica replied with a shrug. Brian and I want something unique. My parents, predictably, focused most of their attention on Jessica and Brian. They asked detailed questions about his job, his family background, his future plans. When Kristen tried to join the conversation, my mother would acknowledge her briefly before turning back to the newly engaged couple. Does it bother you? I asked Kristen later that night. The way they treat you? Kristen gave me a strange half-smile. I've dealt with worse. Besides, I'm not marrying your family. I'm marrying you. A few weeks later, I got a call from Madison, our venue coordinator at Willow Creek Estate. Mr. Jenkins, I wanted to check about the potential date change. We do have some flexibility, but I'll need confirmation soon. Date change? I repeated, confused. We haven't requested any changes. Madison paused. Oh, I'm sorry for the confusion. Someone called asking about your date specifically, wondering if it was available, or if you were considering moving it. I assumed it was someone from your party. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Did this person give their name? I don't believe so, Madison replied. But they seemed to know details about your booking. After hanging up, I immediately called Jessica. She answered on the third ring, her voice artificially bright. Did you call our wedding venue? I asked without preamble. Why would I do that? She replied, but something in her tone was off. Jessica, this is important. Did you or did you not contact Willow Creek Estate about our wedding date? She sighed dramatically. I might have called to ask a few questions. I'm considering it for my wedding too. Is that a crime? You asked specifically about our date. I said, struggling to keep my voice level. You asked if we might be changing it. I was just exploring options, she said dismissively. You're overreacting, Mason. Not everything is about you. I ended the call feeling unsettled. When I told Kristen about it, I expected her to be upset, but instead she became very still, her expression unreadable. Mason, she said finally, I need to tell you something about my past. That night, Kristen revealed that she'd grown up with a similar family dynamic, a younger sister who was favored and who frequently took things that belonged to Kristen. It escalated until she tried to steal my college boyfriend, Kristen explained. She almost succeeded. It broke something in our relationship that we've never been able to repair. Why didn't you tell me this before? I asked. Because it's painful, she said simply. And because I didn't want to color your relationship with your sister. But now I'm worried history might be repeating itself. The next day, my best friend Trevor called. We'd been friends since college, and he was going to be my best man. Dude, Jessica was asking me weird questions about your wedding yesterday, he said. Wanted to know if you and Kristen were having any problems, if you were committed to the venue. It felt off. She's planning something, I said, the realization hitting me hard. I just don't know what yet. Want me to talk to her? Trevor offered. Rachel and I can try to figure out what she's up to. I appreciated the offer but decided to wait and watch. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe Jessica was just being her usual competitive self but wouldn't actually cross any serious lines. I couldn't have been more wrong. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 months before our wedding date. I was in the middle of a coding sprint at work when my phone pinged with a notification. It was from Willow Creek Estate, with the subject line, Confirmation of date change request. My heart sank as I opened it. The email thanked us for our understanding regarding the change of our wedding date, and confirmed that June 15th was now released from our contract. In its place, they had reserved August 30th for us, more than 2 months after our original date. I immediately called the venue, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. This must be a mistake, I told Madison when she answered. We never requested a date change. There was an uncomfortable pause. Mr. Jenkins, we received the change request last week. It was approved by the primary contact on the account. I am the primary contact, I insisted. Actually, Madison said hesitantly, the request came from Kristen Hamilton. She has authorization on the account as well. She spoke with our manager directly. But Kristen had been with me every evening last week. There was no way she had made this call without my knowledge. Unless. Can you describe the person who made this request? I asked, already knowing the answer. Madison's description confirmed my suspicions. The woman who had posed as Kristen was of similar height and build but had darker hair. Jessica had impersonated my fiancé to change our wedding date. I left work immediately, calling Kristen on the way. When I explained what happened, she went silent for so long I thought we'd lost the connection. Kristen? I'm still here, she said, her voice unnaturally calm. We need to talk to your family. All of them. Tonight. My parents lived in a suburban home about 30 minutes from my apartment. I called ahead, insisting it was an emergency family meeting. When they tried to reschedule because Jessica and Brian are coming over to discuss wedding plans, I nearly lost it. That's exactly why we need to meet, I said. Jessica has done something unforgivable. We arrived at my parents' house to find Jessica and Brian already there, looking comfortable in the living room with glasses of wine. My mother greeted Kristen and me with distracted kisses on the cheek before returning to the conversation about flower arrangements. Mom, Dad, I interrupted. We need to talk about what Jessica did. Jessica glanced up, her expression momentarily uncertain before smoothing into innocence. What are you talking about? You called our venue pretending to be Kristen, I said, my voice shaking with anger. You changed our wedding date without our permission. Instead of denial. Jessica exchanged a look with my parents that confirmed they already knew. My stomach dropped. Mason, my father began in his patronizing, be reasonable tone. Jessica has always dreamed of a summer wedding. When she found out Willow Creek had an opening on June 15th. Our date, I interrupted. Our venue that we booked almost a year ago. Yes, well. My mother chimed in. Jessica and Brian don't want to wait too long for their special day. And the venue mentioned you hadn't paid in full yet. Whereas Jessica and Brian were willing to pay the entire amount immediately. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you're saying it's okay that she stole our wedding date because she paid more money? Nobody stole anything, Jessica said, rolling her eyes. You can still get married. Just on a different date. August is still summer. We send out save the dates, Kristen said quietly. People have made travel arrangements. Jessica shrugged. That's not my problem. You can send out change cards. This is our wedding, I said, my voice rising. Do you understand that? The biggest day of our lives, and you just hijacked it because you wanted it? Oh, please. Jessica snapped, finally dropping her innocent act. Like you even care about the details. Men don't care about weddings. Kristen probably planned everything anyway. That's not the point, I argued. The point is that you deliberately went behind our backs. The point, Jessica interrupted, standing up to face me, is that Brian and I are ready to start our lives together now. We don't want to wait a year like you two. And Willow Creek is perfect for us. It was perfect for us too, Kristen said. That's why we booked it. Jessica turned to Kristen, her expression hardening. Look, I'm sorry if your feelings are hurt, but this is happening. You can cry later. This day belongs to me now. The cold, calculated cruelty of those words stunned me into silence. I looked to my parents, waiting for them to step in, to acknowledge how wrong this was. Instead, my father cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mason, you've always been the mature one. The understanding one. Jessica is so excited about this venue, and they've already put down the non-refundable deposit. Surely you and Kristen can be flexible? In that moment, I realized that nothing had changed since childhood. Jessica would always take what she wanted, and my parents would always justify her actions. The only difference was that now her selfishness was affecting Kristen too. I looked at Kristen, expecting to see hurt or anger. Instead, I saw something that looked almost like calculation. She was watching Brian carefully, her eyes narrowed slightly. "We're leaving," I announced. "And just so we're all clear, I will never forgive this. Any of you." As we walked out, I heard Brian say, "Drama queen much?" followed by my family's laughter. In the car, I broke down. 32 years of being second best, of having my feelings dismissed, of watching Jessica take while my parents applauded her for it. It all came crashing down on me at once. "I'm so sorry," I told Kristen, wiping angrily at my tears. "I'm sorry my family is toxic. I'm sorry Jessica stole our venue. I'm sorry you got dragged into this mess." Kristen reached across the console and took my hand. "Mason, there's something I need to tell you. Something important about Brian. But not here. Let's go to Trevor and Rachel's place. I think we'll need their support for this conversation." As we drove away, Kristen made a brief phone call. I only heard her sigh. "It's happening." "Yes. Earlier than we expected. We'll need to accelerate the timeline." I was too upset to ask questions. Little did I know that my world was about to be turned upside down for the second time that day. Trevor and Rachel welcomed us into their apartment with open arms. Rachel took one look at my face and immediately pulled out a bottle of whiskey, while Trevor set up the living room for what he called an emergency friendship intervention. Once we were settled with drinks in hand, Kristen took a deep breath. "Mason, there's something I haven't told you about myself. And about Brian." She reached for her purse and pulled out a sleek tablet. After entering a complex password, she handed it to me. On the screen was what looked like a professional dossier on Brian Reynolds, complete with multiple aliases, previous addresses, and a mugshot. "I don't just work in financial analysis," Kristen explained, her voice steady but tense. "I specialize in fraud investigation. 5 years ago, I was assigned to track a pattern of financial scams targeting wealthy women across multiple states. The perpetrator was excellent at covering his tracks, but I started to notice his methodology. He would identify women with substantial assets or family money, engage in whirlwind romances, secure quick engagements, then drain their accounts and disappear right before the wedding." I stared at her, struggling to process what she was saying. "And Brian is this con man?" Kristen nodded. "His real name is Brendan Russell. He's operated under at least 7 different identities that we know of. Brian Reynolds is his latest creation, complete with a fabricated employment history and false references." "Wait," Trevor interrupted, leaning forward. "Are you saying you knew who this guy was when Mason introduced you to Jessica and Brian?" "Yes," Kristen admitted. "I recognized him immediately. I've been tracking him for years." A terrible thought occurred to me. "Kristen, did you start dating me because of my sister? Did you know Brian would eventually target her?" "No," Kristen exclaimed, looking genuinely distressed. "Mason, I met you before I had any idea about your family connections. Our relationship is real. I love you." Her expression softened. "But when I met your sister and saw how vulnerable she would be to someone like Brian, I started monitoring the situation. When he appeared in her life, I knew it wasn't a coincidence." "So why didn't you tell me?" I asked, feeling betrayed for the second time that day. "Why keep this secret?" Kristen looked down at her hands. "At first I couldn't. This is an ongoing investigation, and I'm bound by confidentiality agreements. But beyond that, I was afraid. Afraid you wouldn't understand, afraid you'd think our whole relationship was a lie." She looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "And then I fell in love with you, and telling you meant risking losing you. I kept telling myself there would be a right time." Rachel, who had been quietly taking this all in, spoke up. What exactly is Brian planning with Jessica? Based on his pattern, he'll marry her, combine their finances, and then empty their accounts right before or after the wedding. Given your parents' obvious willingness to financially support Jessica, I suspect he's targeting them too. The accelerated wedding timeline is his standard approach. It doesn't give people time to think clearly or investigate him properly. I tried to absorb all this information. My fiancé was essentially an undercover fraud investigator. My sister's fiancé was a professional con man. And our wedding venue drama was now the least of our problems. We have to warn Jessica, I said automatically, reaching for my phone. Kristen gently put her hand over mine. Mason, she won't believe you. Think about it. You just had a massive fight where you accused her of stealing your wedding. If you now tell her that her perfect fiancé is a fraud, she'll see it as jealousy or revenge. But we can't just let her marry this criminal. We won't, Kristen assured me. I've been building a case. I have evidence of his previous scams, testimony from other victims, and documentation of his real identity. But if we move too soon, he'll just disappear again and resurface somewhere else with a new identity. We need to catch him in the act. So what are you suggesting? Trevor asked. That we just let this wedding planning continue while this guy potentially scams Mason's family? Not exactly, Kristen said. We monitor the situation closely. We gather more evidence. And we prepare to intervene at the right moment, when he can't easily escape and when the evidence against him is overwhelming. This is insane, I muttered, rubbing my temples. My sister steals my wedding venue. And it turns out her fiancé is actually a con artist being tracked by my fiancé, who isn't just a financial analyst but some kind of fraud investigator. I know it's a lot to take in, Kristen said softly. And I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I looked at her, really looked at her. Despite my shock and confusion, I could see the Kristen I fell in love with. The intelligence, the compassion, the strength. Yes, she had kept secrets, but I understood why. And wasn't I keeping secrets too, in a way? Hadn't I downplayed my family's dysfunction? Avoided telling her just how bad things had been growing up. So what now? I asked finally. No, Kristen said, squeezing my hand. We let Jessica have June 15th at Willow Creek Estate. We step back, appear to accept the situation, and we watch. Meanwhile, I coordinate with my team to finalize the case against Brian. The next day, I received an unexpected call from my cousin Megan. We had been close as children but had drifted apart in adulthood, largely because she couldn't stand Jessica. Apparently, she had heard about the wedding venue drama from a mutual friend. This is classic Jessica, Megan said, not bothering with pleasantries. Remember your 16th birthday when your parents gave you that car? And then suddenly it became Jessica's car because she had more social obligations. I remember, I said. I had almost forgotten that particular betrayal among so many others. Or what about your college graduation party that turned into her high school graduation celebration halfway through? Your parents have been enabling her narcissism for decades, Mason. This wedding thing is just the latest example. Talking to Megan brought back a flood of memories. All the times Jessica had taken what was mine, all the times my parents had justified it. All the times I had swallowed my hurt and tried to be the mature one. It was a lifelong pattern, and I had been playing my assigned role perfectly. I can't do it anymore, Megan, I admitted. I can't keep pretending this is okay. Then don't, she said simply. Set boundaries. Stand up for yourself and Kristen. And if they can't respect that, maybe it's time to reevaluate how much these relationships are serving you. After hanging up, I shared Megan's insights with Kristen. She listened thoughtfully, then said, She's right, you know. What your family is doing isn't normal or healthy. Regardless of what happens with Brian, you deserve better treatment. And for the first time, I truly believed it. Over the next few months, Kristen and I withdrew from family events. We declined Sunday dinners, made excuses for holiday gatherings, and generally kept our distance. It wasn't hard to do. Jessica was so consumed with her wedding planning that she barely noticed our absence. When my parents called to complain about us being difficult, I kept conversations brief and non-committal. Meanwhile, through our network of friends and family, we kept tabs on the wedding preparations. Jessica had apparently gone into full bridezilla mode, demanding extravagant additions to the Willow Creek package that pushed the budget to astronomical levels. According to Megan, who was reluctantly included as a bridesmaid, Jessica had chosen a designer gown that cost more than some people's cars. "Your parents remortgaged their house," Megan told me during one of our regular update calls. "Jessica convinced them that since they paid for your college, they owed her an equivalent investment in her perfect day. They're draining their retirement accounts, Mason." This news hit me hard. Despite everything, I didn't want my parents to suffer financially. "Have they met with Brian's family yet?" I asked, following a script Kristen had prepared. We were carefully gathering information without raising suspicions. "That's the weird thing," Megan replied. "Brian always has an excuse for why his parents can't make it to planning events. First they were traveling in Europe, then his dad had a minor health scare, now they're renovating their house in California and can't get away. Jessica doesn't seem concerned, but it's strange." "Right. Very strange," I agreed, making a note to tell Kristen. This fit the pattern she had described. Brian's fictional family was always just out of reach. Another red flag came from my friend Stephen, who worked at the bank where Jessica had her accounts. While he couldn't legally share specific information, his carefully worded warning told me everything I needed to know. "If I had a sister," he said during a casual lunch, "who was planning to combine finances with a new husband, I might suggest she maintain a separate account for emergency funds, just as a general practice. Especially if her future husband seemed particularly interested in her account structures and investment portfolio. Brian, it seemed, was already laying groundwork for accessing Jessica's money." The wedding invitation arrived 5 months after our confrontation, printed on thick cream cardstock with gold foil accents. It formally requested our presence at the wedding of Jessica Marie Jenkins and Brian James Reynolds at Willow Creek Estate on June 15th, the date that should have been ours. Included was information for an online registry filled with high-end items and a note explaining that they had also registered for a honeymoon fund, where guests could contribute to their planned week European tour. "They're certainly not being subtle," Kristen remarked as she examined the invitation. "This registry is designed to extract maximum financial gifts from guests." "Are we actually going to attend?" I asked. Kristen nodded. "We need to. My team will be monitoring the situation, and will need to be present for the intervention." As the wedding date approached, the reports from our sources became increasingly concerning. Jessica's bachelorette party in Las Vegas had ended with her drunk calling Stephanie, another bridesmaid, crying about how Brian had asked her to add his name to her investment accounts to simplify things after the wedding. He had also suggested she sell her condo and move into his apartment, despite her condo being newer and in a better location. "She's starting to see cracks," Kristen observed when I relayed this information. "But she's in too deep to admit it, even to herself." I made one last attempt to warn my parents. I called my father on a day I knew he'd be alone, working in his garage workshop. "Dad, I'm concerned about how quickly Jessica and Brian are moving with combining finances before they're even married," I said carefully. "Has anyone done any background checking on him? Verified his employment or family connections?" My father's response was dismissive. "Your sister is a grown woman, Mason. And Brian is a successful businessman with excellent prospects. Just because you're jealous of their relationship doesn't mean you should try to cause problems." "I'm not jealous," I protested. "I'm worried. Something about him doesn't add up." "That's enough," my father said sternly. "Your mother and I are tired of your negativity. If you can't be supportive of your sister's happiness, perhaps you shouldn't attend the wedding at all. I hung up feeling defeated but not surprised. Jessica had always been able to wrap our parents around her finger, and Brian had apparently inherited that power by association. The night before the wedding, Kristen received a call that kept her on the phone for over an hour. When she finally returned to bed, her expression was a mix of determination and satisfaction. "It's all coming together," she told me. "My colleague Daniel will be at the wedding tomorrow. He's one of Brian's previous victims. Though Brian doesn't know we've connected with him. Everything is in place." "What exactly is going to happen?" I asked, both nervous and curious. Kristen kissed me softly. "Justice," she said. "Justice is going to happen." The rehearsal dinner that evening was tense. Jessica alternated between smug triumph when looking at us and anxious glances at Brian, who was charming everyone with stories about his fictional past. I noticed him paying particular attention to my parents, asking detailed questions about their retirement plans and investment strategies. When Brian stepped away to take a call, Jessica sidled up to me. "I'm so glad you decided to be mature about all this," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "It really is for the best. This venue suits our wedding vision perfectly." I bit back the retort I wanted to make. Instead, I said simply, "I hope you get exactly what you deserve tomorrow, Jessica." She took it as a blessing rather than the warning it was meant to be, patting my arm condescendingly before returning to Brian's side as he re-entered the room. Kristen, who had been observing this interaction, slipped her hand into mine. "One more day," she whispered. "Just one more day." June 15th dawned bright and clear, perfect wedding weather. Kristen and I dressed carefully for the occasion, she in a stunning but appropriately subdued navy dress, me in my best suit. We wanted to look good but not draw attention away from what was to come. Willow Creek Estate looked exactly as we had imagined it would for our wedding. The gardens were in full bloom, the grand old trees providing dappled shade over the ceremony area. White chairs were arranged in neat rows facing an elegant floral arch. It was beautiful, and I felt a momentary pang of grief for the wedding that should have been ours. "You okay?" Kristen asked softly as we found seats near the back. "Yeah," I replied, squeezing her hand. "Just thinking about what might have been. We'll have our day," she promised. "A better day than this one." The guests assembled slowly, my parents' friends, Jessica's college roommates, distant relatives I barely recognized. My parents arrived looking stressed but trying to hide it behind forced smiles. My mother's eyes were puffy, suggesting she had been crying. Though whether from joy or the financial strain of this extravaganza, I couldn't tell. Brian stood at the altar, looking every inch the successful businessman in his designer tuxedo. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have been impressed by his confident stance, his easy smile, the way he warmly greeted each member of the wedding party as they took their places. And then the music changed, and everyone stood as Jessica began her walk down the aisle on our father's arm. Her dress was elaborate, a princess ball gown with a cathedral train and enough crystals to rival a chandelier. Her expression as she passed our row was pure triumph, her eyes meeting mine briefly in a look that clearly said, "I won." The ceremony proceeded as expected. The officiant spoke about love and commitment, Jessica and Brian exchanged meaningful glances, and my parents beamed from the front row. I kept glancing around, wondering when and how Kristen's plan would unfold. She sat calmly beside me, her posture relaxed but alert, like a cat waiting to pounce. Then came the moment. If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The traditional pause followed, usually just a formality. But then a man stood up from several rows ahead of us. He was well dressed, mid-40s, with a serious expression. "I have cause," he said clearly. A collective gasp went through the assembly. Jessica's face contorted in outrage, while Brian's expression flickered briefly with something like fear before settling into confused innocence. "Sir, this isn't appropriate," the officiant began. But the man was already moving toward the front, pulling something from his jacket pocket. "My name is Daniel Westfield," he announced, his voice carrying across the now silent gathering. "And the man you know as Brian Reynolds defrauded me and my mother out of nearly $400,000 3 years ago, under the name Bradley Richards." Brian laughed nervously. "There's been some mistake. I don't know this man." Daniel held up what I now could see was a file folder. "I have documentation of your previous identities and frauds across 5 states. I have testimonies from 7 other victims. I have proof that you are not Brian Reynolds, that you do not work for Meridian Pharmaceuticals, and that your entire life story is fabricated." Chaos erupted. Jessica was screaming at Daniel to leave, my father was demanding security, guests were murmuring in shock and confusion. And through it all, Brian's face had gone from confused to calculating. I watched as his eyes darted to the nearest exit. But before he could move, 2 men in suits appeared at the side doors of the venue. Kristen stood and walked calmly to the front, her professional demeanor completely different from her usual warm presence. "Mr. Russell," she said, addressing Brian by his real name, "my team has been tracking your activities for 5 years. We have documentation of every account you've emptied, every identity you've created, and every woman you've defrauded. The authorities have been notified, and there are officers waiting outside." Brian's face twisted with rage. "You," he snarled, looking from Kristen to me. "This is your doing." "No," Kristen corrected calmly. "This is your doing. Every lie, every theft, every life you've damaged, those were your choices." Jessica, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly lunged at Kristen. "You jealous bitch! You're making this up because you couldn't stand that I got the perfect wedding venue." "Jessica," I intervened, stepping between them. "Kristen is a financial fraud investigator. She's been building this case since before you even met Brian. This isn't about the venue." "Liar!" Jessica screamed, mascara streaming down her face. "You've always been jealous of me. You've always wanted to ruin my happiness." It was at that moment that my mother, surprisingly, spoke up. "Jessica, be quiet and listen," she said sharply. "Something very serious is happening here." Daniel had been distributing copies of his evidence to the wedding party and my parents. My father was scanning the documents, his face growing increasingly pale. "These bank records," he said weakly. "These signatures. Jessica, did you add Brian to your accounts?" Jessica's silence was answer enough. Brian, seeing the situation deteriorating rapidly, made a break for the side door. He didn't make it 3 steps before one of Kristen's colleagues intercepted him. Within moments, he was being escorted from the venue in handcuffs, shouting accusations and threats as he went. The perfect white wedding dissolved into pandemonium. Guests were buzzing with shock and excitement, some already on their phones spreading the news. The wedding party stood awkwardly at the altar, unsure whether to stay or leave. And at the center of it all was Jessica, her elaborate dress suddenly seeming ridiculous as she sank to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. I felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication, certainly, but also a strange sadness. Despite everything Jessica had done, she was still my sister. And seeing her humiliated on what should have been the happiest day of her life brought me no joy. Kristen touched my arm gently. "The authorities will need statements," she said. "And I think your parents could use some support right now." Looking over at my shell-shocked parents, I nodded. Whatever had happened between us, they were still family. And they had just discovered they had narrowly escaped being victims of a sophisticated financial predator. As I moved to join them, I heard one of the older guests mutter, "Most dramatic speak now or forever hold your peace moment I've ever seen. This will be talked about for years." She wasn't wrong. In a strange way. Jessica had gotten her wish for a memorable wedding day, just not for the reasons she had hoped. 1 month after the wedding that wasn't, I sat in a coffee shop waiting for Jessica. She was late. Which wasn't surprising. What was surprising was that she had agreed to meet me at all. The aftermath of Brian's arrest had been chaotic. Investigation revealed that he had already transferred significant sums from Jessica's accounts to offshore holdings. My parents discovered that during the rehearsal dinner. Brian had accessed my father's phone and attempted to gain entry to his investment accounts. The financial damage could have been devastating if not for Kristen's intervention. Jessica arrived looking nothing like her usual polished self. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face makeup-free, her clothing casual. She slid into the chair across from me without meeting my eyes. "Thanks for coming," I said, pushing a latte toward her, her usual order. She nodded silently, wrapping her hands around the cup. "How are you doing?" I asked, though the answer was written clearly on her tired face. "How do you think?" she replied, but without her usual bite. "I'm humiliated. I'm broke. I had to move back in with Mom and Dad because I can't afford my condo payments after what Brian took." She finally looked up at me. "Everyone's talking about me, Mason. Everyone knows I was stupid enough to fall for a con man." "You weren't stupid," I said. "Brian, or whatever his real name is, was a professional. He'd done this many times before. He knew exactly what to say, how to act, what buttons to push." Jessica's laugh was hollow. "That's generous of you, considering everything. I'm not saying this to be nice," I clarified. "I'm saying it because it's true. Kristen has shown me the files on this guy. He's manipulated dozens of smart, successful women. You were a target, not a fool." Tears welled in Jessica's eyes. "Why didn't you warn me? If you and Kristen knew who he was, why did you let it get all the way to the wedding day?" It was a fair question, one I had struggled with myself. "Would you have believed me?" I asked gently. "After everything that happened with the venue? If I had come to you and said your perfect fiancé was actually a fraud, would you have listened? Or would you have seen it as jealousy or revenge?" Jessica's silence was answer enough. Kristen's team needed to catch him in the act. I continued. If they had moved too soon, he would have disappeared again, created a new identity, and found new victims. They needed irrefutable evidence to put him away for good. So I was bait. Jessica said bitterly. "No," I corrected. "You were a potential victim they managed to save before the worst happened. Yes, you lost some money. Yes, you experienced public embarrassment. But others lost everything: homes, life savings, family heirlooms. Some never recovered." Jessica wiped at her tears. "Mom and Dad are devastated. Not just about the money, but about how they..." She trailed off. "About how they treated you differently from me?" I supplied. "About how they enabled behaviors that made you vulnerable to someone like Brian?" She flinched but nodded. "They're in therapy now. Dad actually apologized to me yesterday. I think it was the first time in my life I've heard him admit he was wrong." She looked down at her untouched coffee. "They want to talk to you too." To apologize. I wasn't sure I was ready for that conversation yet. The wounds were still too fresh, the betrayal too recent. But the fact that they were acknowledging their role in our dysfunctional family dynamic was a start. "Maybe someday," I said. "But not yet." Jessica nodded, then asked hesitantly, "How's Kristen?" "She's good," I replied. Her work on Brian's case earned her a promotion. "And we're planning our wedding, a simple beach ceremony in September." "That sounds nice," Jessica said, and for once, there was no envy or competition in her voice. "I'm sorry I took your venue, Mason. I'm sorry for a lot of things." It wasn't a comprehensive apology, but from Jessica, it was monumental. Years of entitlement and favoritism had created deep-seated patterns that wouldn't change overnight. But this was a beginning. "I'm sorry too," I said. Not for what happened with Brian. That was his fault, not mine. But I'm sorry I enabled the dynamic for so long by always backing down, always being the understanding one. I should have set boundaries years ago. We talked for another hour, really talked, perhaps for the first time as adults. There were uncomfortable moments and painful acknowledgments, but also glimpses of the relationship we might someday build if we both continued to do the work. When Jessica left, I called Kristen. It went better than expected, I told her. I'm glad, she said. Family healing takes time, but recognition is the first step. 3 months later, Kristen and I stood barefoot on a beach at sunset, surrounded by a small group of true friends and supportive family members. Megan was there, as were Trevor and Rachel. My parents had not been invited. That relationship was still too fragile. The trust too broken. Jessica had been given the option and had chosen to attend, sitting quietly in the back, a physical manifestation of her efforts to change. As we exchanged vows, I reflected on everything that had brought us to this moment. The betrayal that had led to revelation. The pain that had led to growth. The broken relationships that were slowly, tentatively being rebuilt on healthier foundations. I promise to always be honest with you, Kristen said as part of her vows. A meaningful glance acknowledging our own journey through secrets and truth. And I promise to always stand by you and stand up for us, I replied, thinking of how much I had grown beyond the conflict-avoidant person I had once been. Later, at the simple reception, Jessica approached us cautiously. It was a beautiful ceremony, she said. Thank you for including me. Thank you for coming, Kristen replied with genuine warmth. Jessica hesitated, then added, I've started therapy. Twice a week. I'm trying to understand why I always needed to be first, to have the best, to take what others had. I don't want to be that person anymore. It was the most self-aware statement I had ever heard from my sister. I reached out and squeezed her hand briefly. That's brave, Jess. Really brave. As she walked away, Kristen leaned against me. Family is complicated, she observed. The understatement of the century. I chuckled. Looking around at our small gathering, the people who had supported us, who had helped us through the darkest moments, who celebrated with us now in joy, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The road had been rocky, the journey unexpected, but we had arrived at this moment stronger and wiser. Life doesn't always give you the wedding venue you planned for. Sometimes it gives you something better, truth, growth, and the courage to stand up for what matters. In the end, that's worth more than any picture-perfect ceremony or elaborate reception. It's the foundation on which you can build a life of authenticity and mutual respect. So let me ask you, have you ever had to stand up to a family member who crossed boundaries? What did you do, and how did it change your relationship? Share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Your support helps me continue sharing these life lessons, and I'm grateful for each one of you who takes the time to connect. Until next time, remember that sometimes the perfect ending isn't what you planned, it's what you never saw coming.